Hi, I'm Paul, and in this video, I'll be taking you through Boom Library's transient shaper, Transforce. Now, we all know what transient shapers do, but this one stands out because it's built specifically for sound design workflows, rather than being adopted for music production. The question, of course, is, what really makes Transforce different, and why might you as a sound designer choose this over other tools which you perhaps already have? Well, firstly, in Transforce, the attack and sustain are treated as separate signals, each with their own EQ and saturation. This allows the signal to hit hard while still sitting cleanly in a mix. Secondly, both the attack and sustain have their own spectral slider, which separates tonal resonances from the broadband signal. All of this opens up possibilities that conventional EQ and transient tools just can't match. Let's take a look. The examples I'll be using throughout these demonstrations are all from the Boom 1 general library. Transforce works well on a variety of sounds, including Foley, weapons, creatures, vehicles, designed elements, and impacts. Speaking of which, I have this metallic impact. So let's enable Transforce on the track, and with the default settings, it passes audio unaltered. We have separate attack and sustain sections, and this is really key to how Transforce works because the two can be processed independently. Before we get to those though, the transient section is where you can set how transients are detected, which of course affects how the signal is split into the attack and sustain signals. We can click the headphone icon to hear what's being detected in isolation. And we can tweak this by changing the sensitivity and also the hold and decay. So if I wanted a shorter transient, I could perhaps do this. I'll maybe even make that slightly shorter still. If needed, you can also enable a filter, bandpass, low pass, and there's a frequency control, or high pass. So you can really tailor the transient detection based on frequency when needed, but for this example, I'm going to leave this off. Also, there is the option to use an external sidechain signal for transient detection. Now that's set, we can start working with the attack and sustain sections. In fact, if I turn off sustain, we're left with just the attack, and if I turn off attack, then of course we just hear the sustain. The controls you'll find in each of these sections are dependent on whether you have tone mode enabled or EQ mode. They operate differently, so let's start with tone mode. In tone mode, we have this spectral slider, which ranges from plus 100% to minus 100%, and this separates tonal resonances from broadband signal and lets you broadly shape the character and harmonic content of your separated signals. Setting this back to 0 for a second, let's just hear the unprocessed sound one more time. There's a metallic edge to the attack, so let's increase it. That gives it a slightly different character, or we could decrease it, like that, so maybe I'll actually increase it a bit. And in the sustain section, we can do a similar thing. I'll just disable attack for now, so we can hear what we're doing. And I'll introduce more of the tonal components. And what we can do in tone mode, as well as affecting those resonances, is add saturation and distortion. Saturation provides a subtle, warm enhancement, while distortion can be used to produce more extreme, aggressive results. Saturation first. Maybe even some distortion. Now on sustain, I'd like it to be quite distorted. Take a look at the visualizers, which show a yellow delta curve indicating the differences between the pre- and post-process signals. That's a broad overview of tone mode, but if I switch this over to EQ mode, now we have a customizable 3-band equalizer for surgical processing. Each band has its own set of controls, and the controls relate to the currently selected band. So if, for example, I wanted to add some more bottom end to the attack, I could do that. Or maybe I could add some high mid to the sustain. Maybe even like that. Also, on the high and low bands, you can choose between peak, 2 steepnesses of filter, 12 or 24 decibels per octave, or shelf, which I'll use now, and boost the top. There's still more we can do to shape this sound. I'm actually going to go back to tone mode because I quite like the spectral adjustments plus saturation and distortion. Now we can move into the post-processing section at the bottom. This affects both the attack and sustain once they've been summed back together, and we have a few more things here, one of which is the limiter. This is very useful to prevent peaks from exceeding 0 dBFS, so I'll set that to say -2 dB. If you needed to boost the signal, you could of course pull the threshold down. You do also have controls for both input and output, so they can be adjusted as needed too. The stylize section adds a little something by shifting the timing of frequencies around a defined target based on the frequency you set. I'll just increase the frequency slightly. If you feel this is a bit too subtle, you can switch it to the hard setting. Also, there's a clipper. The drive control sets how much of the signal is pushed into clipping. And sim offsets the waveform to create asymmetrical distortion. That's made a big difference to the sound. Incidentally, you can change the look ahead at the bottom here, and there's also the option of 2 or 4 times oversampling if you want to reduce aliasing during heavy distortion or clipping. So now let's do an A/B comparison. Here's our original sound, and now with Transforce. Moving on now to 2 more quick examples. Firstly, this creature. With this, I wanted to bring out the raspiness in the voice, so here it is again without any processing. And now with Transforce. And one of the key things I've done here is to use the spectral slider in the sustain section. If this was all the way down, it would sound like this. Or we can increase it. And that really brings out that breathy rasp. Coupled with that, there's some saturation and distortion on here, so here's a quick before and after. Before and after. One final example, a gunshot. We now have a good idea of how the various controls can be used to tailor and shape the sound, but there are some nice presets too. For example, gun tail boost. That's really ramped it up. And we can see that it's achieved that result by adding quite a bit of saturation and some distortion into the sustain. If I wanted to tweak this and add maybe a little bit more of the tonal components, of course, I could do that. Or we could do something very different and use the gunshot distant preset. So that's an overview of how Transforce from Boom Library can be used to tailor and shape sound effects for audio post. The best way to really find out what Transforce can do is to try it out for yourself. Head over to the Transforce page at boomlibrary.com where you can download a demo or purchase. Thanks for watching.